Hello, everyone, and welcome to the 106th MakerDAO Scientific Governance and Risk Meeting, taking place on Thursday, the 20th of August. My name is Long for Wisdom. I am one of the governance facilitators for MakerDAO. I'm joined by currently 36 participants, or 35 other people, I suppose, in this meeting. So what's going to happen is I will briefly go through the agenda, and then we'll start start at the top. Just a general note to everyone, I know most of you already know this, but feel free to interrupt or kind of make comments at any time. Yeah, so I guess I'll just go through the agenda. So we've got the general kind of domain updates. So we'll go through the different domain teams, ask them if they have anything important to share. We'll go through the MIPs updates. I'll do the MIPs governance poll review. Then we've got a few updates from various people on the smart contracts team. We've got Will doing a let's slash presentations. So we've got Will talking about MIP 15, the dark spell mechanism. We're going to have Brian saying a little bit about the postmortem for the recent smart contract issues, possibly as part of the updates. But we'll get to that in a minute. And we've got Chris talking about Chris Mooney talking about Liquidations version 1.2. And then we'll have Vishesh talking about State of the Peg again, as usual. So after that, we'll just have sort of a more freewheeling discussion. But yeah, let's. So I just actually forgot to mention this. I will start off with governance at a glance, as usual. Cool. So active discussions on the forum this week. We've had a discussion created by Seb Ventures, talking about the advantages of using CDAI, ADAI, or YDAI as collateral, which has had some discussion this week, which has been interesting. We've had another post from Matthew Rubinowitz talking about his kind of real world asset proposal and kind of laying out a roadmap to sort of kind of start talking about the kind of steps that we need to take to get from where we are now to a point where we have real world assets live in the Maker protocol, which is awesome. And then we've also had a post recently from Spin or Lucas from Centrifuge, describing a vault liquidation mechanism for which could work for some of the Centrifuge assets, specifically the trade finance ones, which I think is also pretty interesting. We're going to kind of see this over the next few weeks and months, kind of more of a focus on real world assets as we kind of get to a point where we can, finally consider actually onboarding them, which I think is going to be great. And I kind of hope everyone is sort of as excited about that as I guess I am, which sounds kind of sad, but yeah, it's exciting for me and hopefully for some of you as well. Cool. So on the signal requests, seeking consensus terms, we've had one new signal request from Aaron asking whether we should increase the WBTC debt ceiling again. We're approaching the current cap of 80 million. I think we're currently at 77 or something. So if you feel strongly about either increasing that or not increasing that further, I would suggest making your feelings known in that post. Let's see. So we've got one. I think we have one signal request going on chain next Monday from Befitz and Piper to increase the risk premium for WBTC. I believe it will be a chain. The poll should ask for a change from 2% to 4%. So look out for that next week. And then happily, we had 3 signal requests pass last week, which eventually made it through the executive. And that was to increase the system surplus threshold, to increase the dust amount, and to increase to adjust the BAT8 risk premium, which I think was an increase. One other thing I want to kind of just highlight is that Juan has posted a thread in which collateral partners can post to kind of register their interest for presenting in the new collateral poll, which is here. So I would encourage anyone who is a collateral partner or knows collateral partners that want to present to point them in the direction of that thread. Right, so I think that covers governance at a glance. Kiwi, you had a question?
Is the one to raise the WBTC risk premium, is that a poll or an executive?
That is currently a signal request, which and it'll then go through the usual steps. No one's kind of presented it as an emergency change yet, so absent of that happening, it will follow the usual process. Yeah, Lucas is setting in the chat as well. The collateral call is next Wednesday. I believe that is the 26th. Please correct me if I'm wrong. I think it's the 26th. So yeah, look out for that next week. Cool. All right, let's go through the domain updates then. So I guess we'll start with smart contracts. I think Mariano is out. Does Brian, do you want to give a brief update? Yeah, sure.
I can do this. Mariano's out today and tomorrow, so I'll take care of the update for you. Team has been mostly working on, they've been working pretty hard on Liquidations 1.2 for the last week, and we'll have some updates later in the call about that. I do want to mention last week's spell passed. We raised the dust values from 20 to 100 DAI on all collateral types. The base rate was reduced by 2%, which on chain ended up meaning we reduced the stability fee of Mana A from 8 to 6%. We reduced the stability fee on USDCB from 46 to 44%. And then we also increased the system surplus from 500,000 DAI to 2 million DAI. We also had an emergency executive vote spell go out earlier this week to raise the ETH-A collateral debt ceiling from 340 to 420 million DAI. And that succeeded. So that's the updates, mostly hard work on Liquidations 1.2. We've also been doing some updates to our spell process. I did post a postmortem for the WBTC bug that Mariano mentioned last week on the call. Thank you for the link, Long for Wisdom. It's not the smart contracts team's finest moment, but it did reveal a lot of opportunities for us in our process. We all knew that something like this could happen. And it was sort of a matter of when and not if, because the executive spells are smart contracts in themselves. We usually prepare and test them like the morning of. We'll get a head start the evening, like after this call. And frankly, the stakes are high. So in this case, we changed the WBTC line from 40 million. It should have been rad. We changed it to a WAD, and that effectively set the cap to 0. So in the short term, what we've done was we've refactored our test suites to be able to quickly spot an error like this in our audits. We've also added unit testing around all of our modifiable variables that will check for precision ranges. So if anything slips in that's out of a precision range, we'll catch that right away in our tests. We've also, the foundation has some internal tools right now. They're still under construction, but they will be made public for visualizing on-chain changes. So even if you don't read the code, we've got some tools that will let you quickly look and see, like, this is what this spell is going to do to these various values within the system. So we've added those to our checklist that we use when preparing the weekly spells. And then rather than, so we had this process where we kind of used the previous weekly executive and went forward from there. And every week we'd add a little bit more to it. So it'd get a little bit better, and it was an incremental process, but it also, if things changed that weren't in the last weeks, we'd have to go back, and that's where this error happened. So we're gonna be creating a kind of a full-scale template that isn't kind of a copy code type of thing that we'll be using for our weekly executives going forward. And in the longer term, this is something that we can automate. We're doing line changes, stability fee changes, debt ceiling changes every week. And so I think this is a solution that we can automate ourselves out of, rather than relying on this manual spell crafting process that we currently have. So in a way, it's good that this happened, because it does put a spotlight and kind of renewed priority on just how important this spell crafting process is. We're a little bit focused on new features, and it's it's a reminder to all of us that the spellcrafting process needs just as much attention. And I think we're on the right track. We've already made some big improvements, and there's more to come. So if anyone has any questions, we can do it here, or we can do it later on in the meeting. But let me know, guys.
Yeah, I think we can have questions now if anyone has anything burning. Seems like maybe not. So yeah, we can come back to this later with the other kind of smart contract stuff as well. All right, oracles, any updates from you guys? Nick, you around?
Not in terms of kind of governance stuff. We've kind of just been heads down, kind of working ahead, implementing oracles, the backend details at least for a bunch of potential collateral types. So pretty much anything that the smart contracts and risk teams want to tackle in the next 2 months, we've already gotten done. So we're in a good position now to maybe take a look at some of the more kind of difficult ones that have popped up over the past couple months. I think some of you may have heard me. Sorry, I think some of you may have heard me mention in the forum, right, with respect to certain collateral types that, you know, maybe our stack doesn't really support this right now. We're implementing this would be quite difficult. We're looking for more low-hanging fruit to be able to onboard quickly. But now that we've built up this kind of this advanced kind of lead, I think now is probably the right time to start looking at some of those. So this can include stuff like the Uniswap liquidity tokens. This can include stuff like the compound, you know, DAI, the A DAI, the Y DAI type of tokens. You know, looking at the security tokens and how we want to handle the architecture for those. So we're in a good spot right now, but it might be a while before you kind of see the fruits of this labor like actually make it into production.
Awesome. Thank you, Nick, for that update. Looking forward to kind of seeing some of those kind of more exotic types come in. Cool. Risk. Cyrus, do you have any updates?
Yep. So recently we've also been working on Liquidations 1.2, trying to put together some parameters for it, as well as some operational procedures between Liquidations 1.2 and the old circuit breaker, which is still around. We also finally posted the Tether and Pax USD MIP 12 submissions into the forums. Please take a look at those, and those should be going up for a vote soon. We're also wrapping up our ETH A and ETH B risk evaluations. We should be posting those next week as well. Also have a Chainlink evaluation coming hopefully next week. If not, then early the following. I'm trying to squeeze that one into the next cycle as well. We've been spending some time exploring the C tokens as potential collateral types, C DAI and whatnot, seeing if it makes sense to onboard those for governance. And then for next month, we've begun preliminary research on comp token and Pax Gold as well. And I think that's it for updates, but if anybody has any questions, happy to answer offline or whatever.
Okay, thank you, Cyrus. Doesn't sound like there's any questions now. If anyone thinks anything and wants to ask later on in the call, feel free. Cool. Charles, are you ready to do a MIPS update?
Yeah. Can I share my presentation?
Yes, you can.
Oh, perfect. That was quick. Okay. So let's start with this week's activity. On Monday, we had the monthly MIPS governance poll go live. It included 2 sub-proposals, as previously mentioned. So the declaration of intent for forward guidance by Akiva and the sub-proposal for the core personnel offboarding of Richard Brown. The poll results were pretty obvious with 3,691.07 MKR for yes and 0 for no. So that's a good signal. Today, Long for Wisdom is going to confirm those results formally and prepare for the next week's monthly executive that will happen on the 24th of August. So as I mentioned, the monthly MIPS executive will go live on next Monday, the 24th of August, and it will contain those 2 sub-proposals that were included in this week's governance poll. So on the last Thursday of this governance cycle, Long is going to perform the governance cycle review, basically summarizing what's happened over the course of the month, and we'll have an open discussion for feedback and questions on what processes are working, what we can improve, and we'll also have an opportunity to discuss the plans for September's governance cycle. But I do want to note that September's governance cycle begins on September 7th, so there is a week, more specifically the 31st of August until September 4th. That is a gap week for the monthly governance activities. So this allows people who have proposals in progress to submit them for requests for comments and just overall the whole community to gather themselves after this cycle. In terms of the collateral onboarding updates, as Long and Cyrus both mentioned, we have Pax USD and USDT onboarding governance polls that will also go live on Monday, August 24th. And if these governance polls pass, the executive vote would then go live on September 4th. I also wanted to note that since LRC was rejected from the inclusion poll stage of this month's governance cycle, and the signal request was put up on the forums to gauge sentiment regarding the timing of its potential resubmission. Go and vote in that signal poll if you have any opinions on it. It will run until the 23rd of August at 12 p.m. EST. And if you look through that forum thread, you'll see that basically the intention behind it is to inform the domain teams that the community would like to see LRC resubmitted into September's governance cycle. Lastly, on collateral onboarding, we still have the community greenlight polls that will be running until August 31st, so don't forget to vote. And now I just wanted to go over some of the proposals that are still in RFC phase. So I did leave one out here, that is the LRC MIP 12 that would potentially be resubmitted for next month. But the other ones that I've been reiterating over the past couple of weeks are MIP 20, so the target price adjustment module. If you still haven't checked it out, go ahead. I also put a recording link for the specific segment that Lev did last week in my weekly MIPS update in the forums. I can link to it in the chat, or if someone else wants to do that now, go ahead. The weekly actual debt ceiling adjustments. So Planet X and myself have slowly been iterating towards creating a reworked version of MIP 17, which was originally for debt ceiling and risk premium adjustments. However, we decided to just focus on debt ceiling, and we're still figuring out the mechanism and whether it should be applied to just crypto assets for short term, or if we should also add some functionality for the future of potential real world assets. So those are some considerations we have in mind. If anyone in the community wants to join our working group, please message myself or Planet X to get involved, and so we can speed up the process of getting that resubmitted. MIP 15, so the dark spell mechanism. This proposal's feedback period ends on at the end of this month. So it is eligible for September's governance cycle, and I think will be speaking towards that and giving everyone a recap of what that proposal was originally for and what the intentions are behind it. And lastly, the MIP 14 protocol DAI transfer. It's still in a request for comments. It was rejected, I think, last month or the month before his governance cycle. But Long for Wisdom was the original author, and he is looking for someone in the community who wants to focus on this proposal and champion it going forward. So if you do want to do that, go ahead and message him or join the MIPS channel and make a comment there, and I'll facilitate the transition of the authorship over. Lastly, we had a new pre-MIP discussion posted on the forums last night, and that's for vault liquidation mechanism for the centrifuge trade finance assets. It was proposed by Lucas. Maybe they would like to make a comment right now or after my little bit or later on in the call. And I just want to remind everyone that there are still active discussions happening with respect to a governance chief contract redesign, the liquidation system 2.0 redesign, and adding a pool to prioritize collateral applications. And there are other ones in there. These are just the most active ones. And that's it for today.
All right, thank you, Charles. Again, if anyone has any questions now, feel free to jump in. Otherwise, we can come back to any questions later on. Okay, doesn't sound like there's anything now. So yeah, I guess I will just do the MIPS governance poll review. As Charles said, I feel like I'm just repeating Charles a lot of the time when I do these. Yeah, the two things included in the governance in the bundle governance poll were the declaration of intent for forward guidance by Akiva and the sub-proposal to offboard Richard Brown. As Charles said, the bundle passed, and I don't see any reason for it not to move to executive on Monday. So stamp of approval confirmed, etc. Cool. All right, let's get on to some of the actual sort of presentation-y stuff then. Will, do you want to talk about MIP 15, the dark spell stuff, for hopefully the final time?
Yeah, I'd love to, actually. Let me just share the link to the MIP and the forums real quick in the chat before I start.
Do you have a presentation as well? Or?
Yeah.
Okay, let me just give you permissions then. Okay, you should be good now.
Okay. So, as Charles alluded, the MIP 15 is eligible for ratification in September. So, I'm quite excited to finally work through that process. So, I put together this presentation to just walk us through a little bit about how we got here, what the dark spell is for people who are new, and some action items. So some things we'll cover today is a brief explainer on the dark spell. This is actually the link that I added in chat has a link to a previous governance and risk call where you can find more technicals. And so if you're interested in that, I'd recommend that video. Timeline from entity launch to today, and sort of how we went from a 0 delay to what is now a 12-hour governance delay. Why the MIP is structured the way it is, and I'll just highlight that the MIP is structured to be quite simple. It's just an entry level MIP that we can build on in the following months upon ratification. And then we have some action items for September, and it's basically just use this opportunity we have between now and September to provide any feedback, and then some things we'll start thinking about upon a successful ratification. So a brief explainer is that we had this issue back in the beginning of the year. We intentionally had a 0 governance delay, as we had a brand new deployment. We wanted to be able to patch bugs if they just showed up. We sort of that was intention. We didn't really need to patch any bugs, but we had the opportunity or ability to if we needed to. But it also opened us up to a governance attack. Someone could use any of the various options like a flash loan. They can just buy MKR and launch a governance attack against MCD. So we were in a situation where if we did find a critical bug when we had a governance delay, that we would probably just need to shut down. We would probably just need to do emergency shutdown. But with this dark spell, we don't have to. It fits into existing governance processes, and it conceals the bytecode. Nothing goes on chain. No one can reverse engineer it. It pretty much checks all the boxes for what we need to do. So it's the best solution we've got for our circumstances. And to understand why we have this as a MIP and how we got here, I think it's important to understand a little bit of the history. We're approaching a year of live MCD, almost 2 months away. But after we launched, everyone would probably remember there was some initial debate around December, where there's about potential governance attack, and there was pretty much, I wouldn't say it was contentious, but both sides explained why we had a 0 delay and why we needed it. But we actually didn't really never really landed on a solution there. And then we just didn't discuss things for several months until February, where there was a series of flash loan exploits that brought this discussion back into the forefront. And we proposed it immediately right away, this dark spell. And in all honesty, we were working on it before. This just accelerated the proposal. So we proposed the dark spell back around ETH Denver time, and then February 21st, we quickly moved to set the governance delay to 24 hours. So we moved pretty quickly there after the February flash loan exploits and secured the system. We also had the dark spell to fix things if we ended up stumbling upon a bug. But then everyone is probably painfully aware, on Black Thursday, we reversed the delay back down to 4 hours and stuck it on there for a couple months until April 20th, where we set it to 12 hours, which is where we're at right now. So yeah, I will just say this is going to be light on technical details. If you're interested in the dark spell, there's plenty of literature and previous presentations on it, but I really wanted to call out a few dates here. We have formal submission between the 7th and 9th, inclusion full between the 14th and 16th, and the big MIPS executive on September 28th. And I'm targeting that we ratify MIP 15 in September. And I think it would set the stage for further action in November and December for us to continue improving upon it. But the action item is that I'm asking people to please review the MIP again and provide feedback. There's still ample time to provide feedback. I think we got 18 days till we even begin the September governance cycle. And here's a link. It's also in chat, and I'll post it again in the meeting. But I think Wrongful Wisdom's the only one who's made comments on MIP so far, so it would be great if others could take a look at it. And lastly, upon ratification in September, which I'm hopeful for, and I think it's a good possibility. We will have an initial set of guidelines for handling a critical vulnerability. Right now, we just have a common agreement as the SE domain team internally on how we would handle this, but this formalizes the process, and it also creates a process where we can onboard community-appointed trusted third parties in the future, and then start adding incremental improvements. So it's the first step, and I think what I would like to highlight at this point is that once it's ratified, we can start having a discussion on who the community-appointed trusted third party or parties will be, and how we will set up a working arrangement with them. And yeah, so I would like to just we'll have some time for questions if anyone has them, but I would like to direct all commenting, all review to the forum thread, where we can continue and make changes to the MIP if anyone desires. But that's all I've got today. If anyone has any questions, I'll answer them now.
All right, thank you all. I just realized I pasted the wrong link into the chat, so that's the correct one. Great. Does anyone have any questions directly related to Dark Spell stuff that they want to address now?
Let's give it up for the marketing department coming up with the name Dark Spell. That's just sounds cool.
Yeah, you liked his name? I do too.
Yeah.
Cool.
I sound ominous when we need to use it.
Yeah. I mean, to some extent, it should sound ominous, though, right?
Yeah.
Awesome. Cool. All right. I think we'll move on. So yeah, thanks again, Will, for that update. I would encourage anyone that has a spare moment to read over that MIP, because yeah, it's potentially an important mechanism. Cool. Chris, do you want to do Liquidations 1.2?
Yeah. Can you give me a co-presenter?
I can.
So I've dropped a link in the sidebar to the Liquidation System 1.2 upgrade forums thread. And everybody see this?
I do, yes.
Okay. So we're going to talk about Liquidations 1.2 today. I'm Chris Mooney, for those of you that don't know me, on the smart contracts team. And so what is Liquidations 1.2? Well, it's a feature where we're going to limit the amount of DAI that's out for liquidation. And so why is that? Well, in the, let's say the recent months, we've seen a huge growth in MCD. Maybe brought on by yield farming or just organic growth. But because of that growth, which is probably what around, last I checked was maybe 1.5 billion of collateral assets and around 420 million DAI, we believe that the keeper's capital reserves are insignificant to handle large pullbacks in the price of some of those collateral assets. So this was a planned feature that we were working on for Liquidations 2.0, and we thought that it was complete enough in that we could sort of back pull it into this and limit some what we believe is a mounting and maybe growing risk in the entire DeFi space today. And we also get a bonus from this because it gives us a little bit more resilience against Oracle attacks that set the prices for Oracle assets down to like one way or something. So in that case, you can imagine an attack would come in, maybe through the fees or some mechanism, the price for all of these collateral assets would get set down to near zero, which would mean that in the next Oracle price update, effectively we would liquidate that entire 1.5 billion of collateral assets to reclaim all that 420 million DAI. And that's a really scary and bad situation. Governance has about an hour to act to try and mitigate that. And with this feature, even if we weren't able to act within that hour, the limit of our exposure would be to this new system variable that would prevent the amount of DAI out for liquidation. So rather than trying to reclaim 420 million DAI, we would reclaim whatever governance sets this new parameter to. So what to expect? We've got a new governance parameter box that's been added to the cat, which has caused us to colloquially call this the litter box. And this new variable has to be set by risk teams and governance. A few of the numbers I've heard tossed around are maybe 10 to 20 million of DAI outstanding. So that's what the box might be set at. I defer to Cyrus's team and other people to sort of come up with a good value. That team has to sort of balance the risk of this new variable against it being too large. If it's too large, then we're in a similar situation to what we're in today. And if it's too small, liquidations don't operate as efficiently as they could. We also add a new cat variable, the litter. So the litter fills the box, right? And this exists to sort of represent the amount of DAI that's currently out for liquidation. We also remove lump, which is array that's denominated in collateral units. So this is the size of a auction lot that can go up right now. And it's because it's denominated in collateral units, while we were developing this, we found that we had a 500 ETH lump, and with the rise in the ETH price recently, that meant that the calculation to build the tab for what would go up for liquidation could have actually overflowed and caused a revert. So not overflowed in a bad way that would like change system accounting, but overflowed in such a way that it would prevent us from liquidating really large vaults that were up for liquidation. And so the problem is there's a lot of cognitive overhead to try and track this lump value because we have to always track the collateral price. So what we've done is we've changed that. We've added a new value per ilk or per collateral type called dunk, which is now a rad and denominated in DAI units because that's what we store DAI units as in the core accounting system. And so now we can set, any one of our collateral types, we can just say, okay, when a liquidation happens, the dunk size is going to be say 40 or 50,000 for that. So this is nice because it gives us a very predictable amount that we might be asking for at a given moment. Governance can kind of set it once and forget it unless like some major macro situation changes. And we also get to add a file check. File is the mechanism we use to set these values that'll prevent dunk from causing an overflow. So we still get the precision, but the overflow risk still exists. But now we'll prevent that from governance from ever being able to really set it close to that overflow. So I've made you some pretty pictures. You'll recognize this graph from Vishesh's weekly presentation. This is basically the the amount of DAI that would be liquidated at any given F price. And I'm going to use this as an example to sort of illustrate how this litter box is going to work. So up here we have time at time 0. I chose 6 hours here just because our liquidation TTL is 6 hours, and the ETH price right now we'll assume is around 420-ish DAI per ETH. So as time goes on, we see an Oracle price. We see an Oracle price fall to let's say what's that, like 325. So that says, okay, this chunk, this area of DAI that needs to be liquidated is going to get accumulated in the litter box. So it's represented by this brown line over here. And then as time goes forward, so we're now an hour in, the price continues to fall, and we're at what is this, about 275. So we're now to 275, and now so all of this DAI needs to be liquidated, and we've added that to the litter box. And so time continues to go on. We hit the 2-hour mark of this awful price crash. All of us are freaking out. We hit the 250 price, and this entire chunk gets liquidated and accumulates in the litter box. And you can see the litter box is now over halfway full of the DAI that we have out for liquidation. And so the next price tick happens, and lo and behold, we're down to what, 200 ETH price now. So there's a huge chunk of DAI that we're going to try and reclaim in this area. And we had a little bit of space left in the litter box, and so we liquidated out of that chunk. Keepers liquidated the amount that they could before the litter box was full. The rest of this DAI in this particular time slice cannot be liquidated because there's no longer room in the litter box. So this entire red area represents DAI that can't be liquidated. and in fact actually gives these vault holders a little bit of a respite so that they can attempt to recollateralize their positions. But in this fictitious scenario, the price is continuing to fall. So we're now down to about 175, and there's a whole new chunk of DAI that's out for liquidation. We're 4 hours into the auctions, but none of this is being liquidated. That means none of this is throwing pressure on the DAI price to go up, other than maybe these vault holders attempting to close their positions. And it's, we believe that it's this scenario right here that on Black Thursday, for instance, would have a very suboptimal pricing. Like we would, find that it would be hard to collect a sort of fair market price in this level of liquidation. I mean, just the volume of DAI that we'd need to collect far exceeds the amount of liquidity available to the keepers. So also in our fictitious scenario, we get down to 150. We're now at the 5th hour of liquidations. Our TTL for the first batch of auctions is 6 hours. And what's nice is that this is a very common behavior that we see whenever we get these like rapid price crashes. In the next time quantum, the price springs back a little bit. And not only does it spring back a little bit, but we're at the 6 hour mark. And in this 6 hour mark, we've now dealt a bunch of this first round of auctions, which has freed us up just a little bit of space in the litter box. And so what can happen now is keepers can bite the next chunk of CDPs that need to be, or vaults that need to get liquidated, and they continue to add it to the litter box. And so, I hope this sort of gives a general idea of how the litter box fills, of what it looks like, and maybe even some of you are already thinking, okay, what are the risks here? What's the, what are we looking at? So I wanted to talk a little bit about the risks. So vaults may be withheld from liquidation while the prices continue to drop. And this could lead to lower liquidation prices, which could be bad for vault holders and bad for the Maker protocol. I think it is the contention of most of the people in the space that this scenario is still far better than one-way bids like we saw on Black Thursday. That the price the price that we would collect for these collateral liquidations would be far better than the price that we would have seen without this feature. So we also have the risk that vaults could avoid liquidation if the price dips and then recovers while the box is full. And I, that's maybe arguable that that's also possibly a feature because the box should be set at what we believe, what governance believes the overall amount of liquidity is, how much liquidity is available in that keeper ecosystem. So so that's actually maybe even a feature, but still worth noting. So the box is set too low for collateral types, then some vaults wouldn't be liquidated that could have been. And this would be extra bad if there was that available liquidity on the market and we just couldn't take advantage of it because we'd set the box far too low. So, and then obviously if you set the box too high, you have a similar risk that you do today. It's probably still strictly better than what we have today if it's set too high because you get that sort of Oracle defense mechanism as well. But it's basically the same problem, which is that we could put so much DAI out to liquidation that it would radically affect the peg and far exceed the amount of liquidity that keepers currently have. So also the litter may accumulate in the box if auctions are not dealt. So this is just an artifact of how the code works, but you'd think that there was a strong enough incentive to deal auctions that you've won, but we've actually seen keepers in the past not deal their auctions. And so what's nice is that the deal function is not authorized, so anyone can call the deal function. So this actually creates an additional incentive for keepers to call the deal function on other people's auctions, just in case, if they want to free up that sort of litter accumulator to make more space in the box. And so like today, the cat may leave behind some dusty vaults. Today that's because of that lump size. And we may also leave behind possibly dusty vaults because, if you imagine a vault could get partially liquidated and still have like just a little bit left over, something under our dust amount, then, and that's still subject to liquidation, but it might be below that dust amount. So, but that's no different than the current risks we have today. So that's it for this presentation. I'm sure people have questions, so I'm gonna stop. Well, maybe I'll leave the screen up, and if anyone has questions, feel free to ask. Maybe there's some in the sidebar. Read it out to me. I can't see the sidebar at all.
Aaron, do you have a mic? Do you want to read these out? Or? No, okay. All right, I'll read it, Aaron. So Aaron was asking whether it's possible to make the litter box dynamic or / automatic. So we could set it to be based on a percentage of the total die supply, just because worrying about changing it as the supply grows and contracts.
Yes, so we, I think right now the way to think about the litter box is for us to hope that our ecosystem can get a reasonable idea of the amount of, and this is never going to be perfect, but the amount of liquidity that keepers have available to them. And the short answer is yes. If we wanted to, we could create an instant access module that you could, hit, and it would, just anyone could call this function on it, and it would adjust the size of the litter box based on the size of the outstanding die supply. So that's certainly a thing that we could add in the future if we thought that was a useful metric or a useful way to set this. I mean, right now, if keepers have enough liquidity, if they could handle like 1 billion of liquidations, then there's no reason we shouldn't set the litter box at 1 billion, right?
Yeah, so I think you're saying it's not directly related to die supply, it's more related to liquidity, right?
It's more related to what we think the market can handle. In Liquidations 2.0, that'll be basically die liquidity in all of DeFi, right? Because it'll be a Dutch auction system. So we'll be able to use single block composability and go out to any source of die in the entire ecosystem and handle liquidations. So we can be more liberal probably with the litter box, or we can get better numbers by looking at how much liquidity is out there. But for now, the keepers actually have to have that die liquidity or be able to at least cycle it from somewhere else within that 6 hours to make these bids. So I think we need a variable to limit this so that we don't get suboptimal liquidations.
I think I have a question.
Yeah, please.
So you kind of talked about changing the dump parameter to, I've already forgotten the new, sorry, the lump parameter to something else. I forgot what it was called already.
Yep, lump to dunk. Yep.
Lump to dunk, that's right. So my question is there any like kind of side effects or like potentially negative side effects of kind of defining the lot size in terms of die rather than collateral? Because presumably that means that the lower the collateral price, the bigger the lot size gets in terms of amount of collateral, right? Like denominated in collateral. Is that correct, or am I misunderstanding?
Yeah. So I've actually been thinking about this change as almost like fully better, but you do highlight an example like, if we want to get, let's say we have a liquidation for a particular ilk that's, going to ask for 40,000 die for that ilk, maybe the amount of collateral that you would get from that would be, hard to cycle that out at market rates or something.
Well,
this would be,
could I just jump in here for a second?
Yeah, please do. Great. Yeah.
The interesting thing, though, that matters is not like the actual number of tokens of collateral. What matters is, the dollar value of that collateral, and is it, economical to move chunks of collateral of that size around. And any risk people who are on the call can correct me on this, but my understanding of how we set lump today, which is the collateral denominated value, is we set it in an attempt to target a certain dollar value per liquidation. But we have the problem then that collaterals change in value. And so over time, lump corresponds to, potentially very different amounts of dollar or DAI value of collateral per liquidation. And so what we're achieving by switching from lump to this new dunk meme, which is just an quantity of DAI per liquidation, is just basically giving governance what it really wants to have in the first place, which is sort of fixed value in each liquidation.
I can kind of see the value of that, I guess. So I guess my concern is, like, we get the collateral price based on the oracles, right? So if in like
that price is only used to determine is the vault safe or not, right? It doesn't go into the calculation of how much
how do you calculate how much collateral to liquidate based on the dunk parameter, right? How do you map like
you
that?
take it proportionally. So if you're let's give a numerical example to make it simple. Let's say your dunk parameter is 50,000, your vault has 100,000 units of debt. So then in your liquidation, you take out 50,000 units of debt, and because 50,000 is half of 100,000, you take half of the collateral to associate.
Right. Okay. That's cool. I was wondering how it would work if like the oracle price was at like 0. Would that like then liquidate like just all the collateral and fill the entire little box?
I mean, that happens today, right? If the oracle price goes to 0, all vaults can be liquidated for that collateral type. But we're putting in a measure where, in fact, you wouldn't be able to liquidate all of the vaults. You'd just be able to liquidate up to the box. But that oracle price wouldn't affect the ratio of collateral to debt in each auction, because that's just determined by the actual amount of debt and actual amount of collateral in the vault at the time of liquidation.
Yeah, I think I just misunderstood how you were kind of translating that. I kind of assumed you were doing it based on oracle price rather than a percentage of like a share of the debt, if that makes sense. But this makes a lot more sense this way.
It's percentage wise, which is actually how it already works today, only in reverse. You take a fixed lump of collateral and you take a portion of debt, in proportion to the ratio of that lump of collateral to the total collateral. So this is just turning that around, and you take a fixed amount of debt and you take collateral according to the percentage of debt you're taking in that byte.
Got it. All right. Any other questions? So Akash just asked.
Yeah, I had a quick question.
Yep.
This might have been covered, but so do all the auctions still take 6 hours, or like I was kind of confused by the part where you're saying anyone can call deal.
Well, all the auctions will still take however long they're configured to take, which is 6 hours. But any deal doesn't require so once an auction concludes, you can't call deal before the auction concludes. That's not changing. But once the auction has concluded, anyone can call deal for that auction, just to sort of clear the auction off the books, send the collateral to the winner, et cetera. And that's already how it works today. So the comment was just that if for some reason a keeper wins an auction and decides not to deal their own auction, maybe they also have like a CDP that they're trying to prevent from being liquidated by keeping the box full. Someone else can come along and call deal and unblock the system.
Okay, thanks for the clarification.
Yep, no problem.
Yeah, and that's not a change really from today. The box component of it is, but anyone can call deal today on another person's auction once the auction is finished.
It's maybe just slightly more important that anyone can call deal once we go to the liquidations 1.2, because it has a little bit more of an effect in terms of maybe unblocking more liquidations if the box is full.
All right. Thank you, Chris and Kurt, for that. I think we may try and move on now, so we're getting a little short on time. Vishesh, do you want to run us through State of the Peg quickly?
Yes, I'll try to be brief since I know we have a jam-packed call today. I think I need perms.
Yes, 1 second. There you go.
All right. So just at a glance, we have a total DAI supply of 430 million. 330 million or so of that is from ETH, 2.7 million from BAT, 11.1 from USDC, 77 million from WBTC, and then a little bit of change from USDCB, and a small amount from KNC and ZRX and Mana, but the chunk of it being the WBTC, USDC, and ETH. So just to take a look at the WBTC supply, that has grown pretty significantly as the debt ceiling was moved, and then it took a little bit of time, but that has also shrunk the excess space in the debt ceiling for WBTC over the last week or so. So this is seeing moderately high utilization and is at a pretty high percentage of the utilization of the current debt ceiling. USDC, however, so USDC-A has seen decreased utilization pretty significantly over the last week or so. So, that dropped by about 38 million and is sitting currently at around 10, 11 million. ETH, on the other hand, has grown pretty significantly. So what we saw basically was over the last week or so, or last 2 weeks, it went from about 284 million to 334 million. So that's a pretty significant 50 million or so increase. So this particular bucket continues to grow. If we look sort of at some of the places where this DAI lives, I mean, there's a small amount in Balancer. There's a bit in Curve, not significantly large amounts. And then if we look at the comp market, basically there's about 212 million or so that's living in the DSR, and a good chunk of that comes from this excess supply of DAI that's supplied to the compound protocol for chasing yield. So we look, it's about 212 million in the DSR. So what's going on with the Peg currently? So you see, in terms of ETH DAI trades, DAI has been trading more or less close to the Peg. So this is roughly at around $1.08, $1.08, $1.09, with a fair amount of slippage on Uniswap trades in both directions. So that kind of tends to move the needle as well. But if we look in terms of USDC trades, so a large chunk of these are actually on Curve. So that's kind of dominating a lot of the USDC DAI volume right now. And those trades basically precipitously in the last 7 days dropped about a cent and have been sitting at an even smaller margin from the Peg, around $1.04, $1.05. If we look at the DAI USD trades, so these have been trading, again, similar pattern, and then in the last 2-3 days, the gap is tightened up to where most of these trades are happening at around $1.05 to $1.05 to $1.07, with actually a surprising amount of slippage on those kinds of trades, even on sources like Coinbase. So it's interesting to note the differences in the profiles of how the different DAI pairs are trading, but the general consensus is kind of that the Peg has come down a bit, and there's basically a gap between where DAI is trading in the peg at basically overall blended around $1.05. So that I think overall bodes pretty well for where the peg is trading in terms of the collateral portfolio, as you know, was touched on. So we had basically, if you look at the ETH price, rose and then remained kind of sustained and has been coming down a little bit in that same time frame. So it's always interesting to note that when the ETH price starts to come down a bit like that, generally what we'd seen in the past was, okay, reduced bullishness on leveraging, and so people tend to buy DAI back up and price goes up a bit. But given that the way that DAI is currently being used is a bit different than it had been in the past, where it's not strictly speaking a simple cycle of minting DAI, selling it for assets like ETH, and then resupplying them in order to rewrap for leverage. There's a bit different structures now that are dominating how DAI is currently used, and it's more of a cycle of minting directly and then supplying directly into protocols for yield. We see a bit of a detachment in terms of what's going on with ETH price and what happens with DAI price. And so I think in the recent month or so, we've seen a bit less of the old narrative where ETH price kind of bullies DAI price, which in and of itself is a potentially positive indicator of kind of the robustness of the DAI ecosystem, in that there are multiple different kinds of external drivers right now in terms of what moves the DAI price. But I would say currently it's primarily still those yield farming opportunities, and you know, basically there are forks, etc., that have popped up, but you know, in large part, there's not as, in the last week or so, there's not as much craziness in terms of yield that is available. Obviously, it's all relative because you still have, you know, a couple 100 million DAI in protocols like Compound. So it's by no means insignificant, but for the moment, things appear to have calmed down a little bit. So it will be interesting to watch how much further this gap will get tightened between where DAI is trading in the peg, or whether there's going to be another cycle of yield farming that will push it back up. I think it's primarily dependent on how people are using DAI and whether they're chasing these yield farming opportunities and putting their capital in DAI or putting it into other assets. Because if the yield farming ecosystem is a bit more diverse in terms of the assets that are being supplied, which appears to be a little bit of what's going on lately, then you know, that potentially stresses the DAI peg a bit less when it comes to yield farming. Okay, trying to keep it tight in terms of time, so I will just pause there, and then if people have specific questions, I'm happy to pull something up. Not seeing anything, so LFW, if you want to take it back, you can.
What are we going to do with that long?
Not sure. That's a very difficult question. Yes, Long, you are muted. Everyone here waited a impressive amount of time.
For complaining. Sorry, guys.
That's respect.
Yeah, anyone go ahead and kind of jump in. Lucas, I think you mentioned you wanted to talk about something.
Yes, I completely missed the prompt by Charles to quickly talk about the liquidations proposal for short-term assets such as ours that we're proposing to be onboarded, that I posted in the forum. It was only last night, so it probably hasn't made the rounds yet, but we've come up with a quite neat solution to solve the keeper liquidations issue for real-world assets specifically that are of very short-term assets. I can maybe give a very quick introduction and then would love to just hear feedback. And Lev, I think you're on the call still. You mentioned you might want to ask some questions or add a comment as well. But the gist of it is that for real-world assets that are very short-term in nature, so an example is a portfolio of invoices, the average maturity date of an invoice, or the payment term of an invoice, are 65 days in the US. So if a portfolio of invoices generally would be fully paid back by day 65 plus maybe a little bit more, or at least the majority would be paid back. A lot of times you can limit it to maybe 90 days total. That means that if you're trying to liquidate a portfolio of invoices like that, it's often not actually the most effective or the most affordable way to try to start an auction or find a distressed loan buyer that you maybe would do with a mortgage. Instead, just waiting and sitting on those loans as they mature is probably a better strategy, just because for such short-lived assets, it's very hard to really discover a price and go through this entire process. So for that reason, what we're proposing to do with centrifuge powered assets that are of short-term in nature is that we don't use the existing flipper that will auction off the collateral, but that we build a mechanism by which the MakerDAO vault can force this portfolio into liquidation, let all of the loans mature, and sort of continuously get paid DAI back as these individual invoices or other loans are paid back. Does that, any questions so far on the mechanism?
Yes, I have a question. Actually, well, first I wanted to say that I generally very much agree with the direction that this is taking. So I think for a while in the discussions of real world assets, or at least some types of real world assets, we were running up against this problem of how to sort of reconcile our current paradigm for how collateral liquidations work with what is suitable for those sorts of assets. So, you know, essentially there's kind of two opposite extremes, one of which is like, you know, kind of the margin trading paradigm. So like, I don't know, the extreme example would be something like you know, trading on BitMEX, where, you know, people are taking on positions with huge amounts of leverage. And then there's like a liquidation engine that, you know, once your position becomes unsafe, will just sort of sell your position as a market order into the order book. And on the other hand, you know, there's sort of in the real world, you know, sort of, you know, long-term, you know, loans. I mean, for example, real estate loans or other kinds of loans, you know, given out by banks, which are, you know, highly non-fungible. The underlying collateral is nowhere near as liquid and doesn't have, you know, continuous price discovery. But on the other hand, you know, the underlying loans have sort of are a lot kind of higher quality and aren't something that you kind of expect to be blowing up every day. In those two opposite extremes, you have, you know, collateral managed in a completely different way. And of course, you know, coming from the world of sort of liquid crypto assets like ETH, our system is mainly geared to dealing with sort of the things closer to the first extreme. So, you know, liquid assets that you want to just, you know, quickly get off the books when they're unsafe. But this really doesn't work for less liquid but high, you know, but potentially high quality assets. where you just might not be able to find a buyer. And there isn't sort of continuous markets and price discovery for these assets. And in general, like, the lending for these assets that MakerDAO is doing is a little bit more ad hoc, right? So the asset might even have been created specifically to go into a Maker CDP to take advantage of the financing. So it's clear that we need to do something different there. And I think your proposal about triggering, essentially, handling the liquidations internally to the vehicle. So essentially just forcing the sort of the manager of the pool to not issue any loans and just wait for these short-term loans to come to fruition is really wise. And my question is, are there similar ideas that you could use for longer maturity assets? So I think you mentioned there that this proposal of just winding down the fund makes a lot of sense for trade finance assets that are sort of approximately, if I remember correctly, 2 months in maturities, which means that it's really not a long wait to wait for those to mature. But what about similar structures that might have longer maturity assets? Can we also apply this idea of sort of handling the liquidations, on the granular sort of asset level internally, rather than trying to liquidate pool shares on chain?
Yeah, so we did spend some thinking, and maybe it makes sense to explain a little bit how to work with short-term assets, and then I can say how we can expand it. But what happens with short-term assets, using the example of an invoice, but like bridge loans in trade finance, other kind of structures work as well, is these loans have a fixed maturity after which the final borrower is required to repay, right? So it's not a line of credit that I can keep open for an unlimited amount of time. So if I, as a small business, borrow money from this asset originator that then takes my loan and uses it as, puts it in this pool and sort of uses this pool as collateral in Maker, I will have a contract that says I'm borrowing $100 from this asset originator. I need to pay back in 60 days. So the normal mechanism is to just say, would be that I actually become delinquent on this loan if I don't pay back. And the SPV that is sort of bundling this pool of loans will have a regular way to do legal recourse against the final borrower. So getting the invoice paid back, like suing for payment and so on. With longer term assets, where waiting for the loan to be repaid is not an option because maybe it's a 10-year mortgage, you can't actually just ask the borrower to repay the loan, because their loan contract might say this loan that is in this pool is actually only due in 10 years. So you would need to find someone else to buy this loan, but that doesn't necessarily happen to have on chain. If you can still require the asset originator to liquidate the vault within the portfolio within reasonable amount of time. We just don't have this option to wait for maturity. So in that instance, what we can do is we can have this process be defined distressed real estate fund that would have a mechanism in place where if Maker or any other investor in this portfolio would ask for money to be repaid, and the asset originator can't find another investor to take on the share of this pool, the drop tokens that we're using as collateral, then the asset originator would have to start liquidating according to this process, and that would mean selling these loans to this distressed real estate hedge fund or whatever it is, or broker, and so you could. And that could still be, you could still give these drop tokens the ability to be liquidated fairly quickly, potentially at a loss when you're involving a distressed loan company or someone else that is trying, of course, to like quickly provide liquidity for which you're willing to pay a premium for. But this is definitely something that we could build into the system if we wanted to extend it. So the main difference would just be that now it's not waiting for maturity, but it is that the asset originator would have to have an off-chain process in place to liquidate its portfolio outside of it. And then as this liquidation occurs, the fiat that is being raised is then being converted to DAI and repaid to the investors of this pool, including the Maker Vault.
Right, got it. Thanks. So do I understand correctly that for longer maturity underlying assets, we could actually use this as like a first line of defense, and then have some kind of on-chain liquidation system as a backstop? So potentially if these are multi-year long mortgages, you can have force the asset originator, is it, to liquidate the underlying portfolio. But if they weren't able to do that in some period of time, you could fall back to some on-chain auction with sort of keepers participating in it, just as a backstop in case the asset originator wasn't able to liquidate the positions.
I think that's what we would want to get to. This is there we start running into the issue again, that we'd have to have this, what really is an auction of securities on chain, which is legally definitely possible, and we have started doing research, and I think Centrifuge is not the only community member that is looking into that, but where there's probably still some work to determine what the safest way is to do that from a legal point of view, because now you're sort of auctioning off this collateral or the security on chain, and of course if this then has to be done in a way that is compliant with security regulations, and so you maybe have to use a broker dealer that could broker this sale. You'd start looking at how do you whitelist these keepers and ensure that they are actually eligible to buy the security and so on.
I see, thanks.
I see Akiva, you wanted to ask some or add something.
Yeah, if
Yeah,
you're
so-
listening free, Akiva, go
More
ahead.
time.
Yeah, so
To hear.
the vote for advocacy just passed, and it's going to go to executive next week. And if we get through, we're going to try to have a call for self-side advocacy for real world assets and how that relates to risk parameters. And we're going to try to bring securities lawyers on the call to answer some of the questions.
I had a quick question. So I'm kind of curious, what's the expected interest rate that people, or stability fee that this collateral would be okay with? And I guess if it's a low rate, like how would that battle against a potential high DSR rate?
Actually, like we've done over 2 million in originations with, like, or our asset originators have done over 2 million in originations in the last months since we launched in May, and our average interest rate that we were giving, or that we saw on these assets was, I think 8.5%, 9% APY, so or APR. So that is, I think, very competitive.
Yeah, that's pretty good.
Even with a relatively high DSR, in a relatively high DSR environment.
Cool, thanks.
All right, I think that sounds like a good place to stop. So yeah, thank you everyone. Thanks Lucas for kind of describing those briefly. All right, I will talk to everyone. Well, I'll see everyone next week hopefully. And yeah, everyone enjoy your weeks.
Yeah.